So I'm Richard Wood. I'm the president of the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at the University of Southern California. That's in Los Angeles. I'm a sociologist of religion. I write about the role of religion in public life and mobilizing people to work for justice in the world, social justice in poor communities in America mostly. So religion is this complex thing. It's deep in the human person, but it can also be mobilized for the worst things in the world. Like most things human, it can be used for very good things and very bad things. I think what we've seen in recent years is often the weaponization of religion to drive things that aren't basically religious conflicts. They're nationalist conflicts. They're conflicts of, in my country, white supremacy. But also religion drawn on to help bring people together to reconcile after those conflicts. I'm working with some folks in the Ukraine at the Ukrainian Catholic University, thinking about, can we see beyond the present conflict? How do we draw on religion to bring Ukrainians together again after this conflict is over? What I think is interesting about what we're doing here this week is it's thinking about the role of religion way before the conflicts break out. That is, how do religions address pluralism so that we're working constructively to build bridges between different groups before they descend into conflict. That's a deep preventative kind of work, very creative, that at its best, if it works, means we don't face some of the kind of conflicts we're facing now. That's important work. So I think in the Ukraine, religion is not the cause of the conflict. It's a complex religious world. There's Ukrainian Catholics, Ukrainian Orthodox, other religions, but then there's the Russian Orthodox tradition. I think it's a conflict of national identity and a post-imperial conflict. But religion is being used to mobilize, and in particular on the Russian side, using the sort of deep Russian Orthodox tradition to justify the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And Ukraine's also drawing on their religious traditions to defend the country. We were approached by the Ukrainian Catholic University whether we could help at the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies bring together an American delegation to go spend a week or 10 days in Ukraine, learning about the conflict, learning about the work of the church in working towards reconciliation after the conflict, and help educate Americans on what's going on there. It's not a religious mission. It's very much an exchange between two societies trying to understand each other. Americans to understand the Ukrainian conflict, but also Ukrainians to understand why support for Ukraine has become so controversial in the United States, which I think for a lot of Ukrainians makes no sense at all, because they're so clear that they are the victims of aggression and deserve American support. I mean, this is the hard question around the world today. All over the world, there are religious leaders captured by a nationalist agenda, or in my country, captured by a kind of white supremacist or Christian nationalist sort of agenda, who then articulate their political commitments, or in the Russian case, their military commitments, in religious terms to help justify what they're doing. But I think in most cases, they aren't fundamentally motivated by their religion. Although in some cases that's a hard line to draw. Settings of the control over Israeli politics of some of the extremist settlers. Is that a religious agenda? Sometimes it looks like that, even though it's probably more driven by nationalist aspirations than anything. Likewise in India, the Hindu nationalist project. It's both religious and nationalist simultaneously. I would have to say, as an American, I think we have to be honest that some of the authoritarianism occurring in American politics is just a political power play, but some of it really is driven by Christian nationalism, and I think we have to be honest about that and fight that. It's always the great temptation of religions to form an alliance, get in bed with power in order to either promote its own agenda, or because it's captured by the passions of power politics that can sort of take over and motivate and be justified by religious commitments. I think the best of the religious traditions have a lot of resources for resisting that temptation, for staying centered on the deep spiritual values out of their traditions that many traditions share. But I think all traditions are tempted by that way of using their religion. Catholicism has been guilty of that in history. Other religions have been guilty of that in history. It's a human story of these things we call institutions, whether that's religion or nation or ethnic identity. They can be forces for good in the world, but they can also be mobilized for the worst sides of human nature. I think the great lesson of history is just how dangerous that move of fusing religion and politics, just how dangerous that can be for social destruction, for war, but also for undermining the credibility of religion. That's what happens in the long term when this goes on, is the faith traditions themselves, the spiritualities themselves are compromised by the alliance with power. So I haven't been to Ukraine yet. We're planning this delegation for this coming September. But I've led delegations like this in Central America in the 1980s, in the Philippines in the 1980s, right after the revolution that overthrew Marcos, nonviolent revolution that overthrew Marcos. I think here's the more controversial thing I might say in this setting. I'm not sure the model of interreligious dialogue has done the work we need it to do in the world today. I'm increasingly interested in models of interreligious collaboration on concrete projects to improve things in the world, working together to diffuse conflict in society, working together to provide social services during the pandemic, working together to serve migrants crossing into Europe or North America. I think it's those projects where I and Jewish brothers and sisters and Muslim brothers and sisters and Buddhists and secular humanists collaborate on something in the world. I think that's where the much deeper work of shared identity, shared commitment really takes shape. Dialogue only goes so far. And here I think Pope Francis's language of encounter really matters. Dialogue can sometimes get us to that level of deeper encounter. But I think shared projects in the world get us there much more quickly and involve our whole selves instead of just our minds and our mouths. I think that's the level of encounter the world needs right now to counterbalance the level of polarization we're facing. There is a model of this in the world that I've spent much of my career writing about. In the States, it sometimes goes by the term faith-based community organizing, sometimes broad-based community organizing, faith-rooted organizing. It's also present in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Eastern Europe, in Haiti, in East Africa, Rwanda, in Ghana, in Central America and Mexico. It's people coming together across different varieties of Christianity, but also with Muslims and Jews, sometimes with deep labor union traditions, to pull people out of their private lives into working together to get government and corporations to serve poor communities better, serve migrants better. It's a really strong model of how you bring people together across faith traditions. They have really good tools based on me and you building a relationship that's about really understanding each other, not just about talking about our religion. It is a model of encounter. It's truly, at its best, it's a model of encounter where we come to understand each other and what's really at stake in our shared struggle to build a better world. It's a lesson we can learn something from. On one hand, clearly the language of mission is partly about evangelising the structures of the world in ways that lead to a better world, bring justice into the world in new ways, reform institutions in new ways. I'm also a believer, it's less fashionable to say this in some circles these days, that part of the Catholic mission is always going to be witnessing to the deep values and truth of the gospel. And in the kind of circles I run in, that's often very much downplayed. But I think it is at part of the heart of the faith. It doesn't mean we have to be arrogant and impose Catholicism, but it's being honest about where our deep values come from, where our deep spiritual experience comes from, and sharing that with people and learning from their own deep spiritual experience, secular, other religions, all that. I like, again, Francis's language of missionary discipleship, or John Paul's language of the new evangelization. Really drawing on our Catholic faith to carry us into the world in ways that don't pretend we're not motivated by our faith, are honest about that, but also really open to collaboration with folks of all different traditions.